Welcome back to Detroit's Morning Answer. Now, I know I can get on a soapbox sometimes, especially with things I'm passionate about. And one of the things I'm passionate about is protecting our kids. So if you have somebody that in your orbit, you have a child who's fighting through the trans issues, let's protect them. Let's protect them. Now I have to pivot after that, Paul. But I gotta tell you guys, today's guest has spent more than 2 decades on the front line of one of the most important battles in America, the fight to defend worker freedom. Mourad has worked for the National Right to Work Committee for more than 21 years, and he now serves as its vice president for legislation. From the halls of Congress, I'm wondering if we crossed paths when I was a state rep in Illinois, to late state legislatures across this nation. Greg has been a consistent force against forced unionism and a voice for the individual worker whose freedom is too often drowned out by entrenched bureaucracies and radical union bosses. At a time when President Trump is charting bold new labor reforms and undoing the wreckage of Biden's policies, the question is clear. Can we finally turn the tide and restore worker freedom in America? Or will the union machine continue to funnel taxpayer money into radical political agendas? And here in Michigan, this fight isn't just theory. Our state became ground zero when Governor Whitmer repealed right-to-work protections, dragging workers back under union control. For Michiganders, this battle is personal. Greg, welcome to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Thanks, John. Glad to be with you.
Now, Greg, let's start with the big picture here. What are the most significant steps President Trump has already taken to roll back some of Biden's labor policies? And where do you see the biggest opportunities to restore true worker freedom?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Trump has done a number of things to start turning things back in the right direction. Biden, of course, came into office declaring that he intended to be the most pro-union administration in American history. And that is certainly something that he did his best to achieve. But Trump has begun turning it around. In the very earliest days of the administration, he did two critical things. He fired the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, a woman named Jennifer Abruzzo, who had been abusing her power grossly to try to shift that entire agency's operation. Instead of being a neutral arbiter between labor and management, to instead really just become the pro-union board and do everything they could to force workers into unions from their end. He also fired a member of the board, Jennifer Wilcox, who was instrumental in setting up a new regime by which they can force workers into unions without even a secret ballot vote under a decision called CEMEX.
Wow.
So it was really ugly stuff going on there. And so Trump immediately took away that board's quorum so they couldn't do anything else until he can get his nominees put through. So he's got two nominees up right now that he nominated right before Congress went into its summer recess, and they were expecting them to get a hearing pretty quickly after the Senate comes back in September. And then, of course, they go into the long queue of nominees waiting for final confirmation on the Senate floor, which Chuck Schumer and the Democrats have been stalling as much as they possibly can. So that's going to be a big step once we can finally get them across the finish line. We can start undoing decisions like CEMEX and the other things this Biden board has done.
Now, I know President Trump has issued a few executive orders. One of them was ending collective bargaining in national security-related agencies. He revoked a lot of the DEI and affirmative action issues that they had. And he also restructured the Federal Civil Service, to name a few. Some of his critics argue that Trump's executive actions on labor are just too aggressive. So how do you respond to that? And why is aggressive reform exactly what's needed in this moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Donald Trump, in his first term in office, tried to do this stuff gently, and the unions and the rest of the deep state had enough time to fire back hard and really did a lot of damage and managed to beat back a lot of it. So this time, he has no choice but to be aggressive. The unions and the deep state have demonstrated what they are willing to do to stop him. And so he's got to come in hard and heavy instead. And yes, that executive order canceling union contracts is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with government employees organizing a union and funding that union voluntarily to be their lobbyist and advocate for their interests, but it shouldn't have the power to sit down across from our elected leaders and bargain a contract that determines how the public purse is going to be spent and how public policy is going to run. That is giving an outside organization far too much power.
That's one of the reasons why when I was a state rep, I took no union money as it relates to public sector unions who thought they could sit across and tell us what to do. I took absolutely $0 for them because I told them, listen, I have sensitivities to unions. I'm a former police officer who was in a union. I understand the plight that a lot of people, especially those who are out there just going to work, showing up every day. But sometimes that union leadership just they get a little in over their head and they think they're bigger than life sometimes. And I told them I'm not taking because I have to vote against a lot of your actions, and I want to be able to sleep at night. Greg, I wanted to sleep at night. But you mentioned the National Labor Relations Board. That's long been a flashpoint. What's really at stake in this current battle over not only over its structure between enriched bureaucrats and workers who want independence?
Yeah, that's the other big thing that's at stake there, besides their freedom to have an actual secret ballot vote before a union is imposed on them, is the ability to get out of a union. Yeah. If you regret having joined it, or if there's been one in your shop for decades and the current employees, none of whom ever voted for it, decide they want to get rid of it. The board under Biden has been doing everything it can to make that nearly impossible by setting up this regime of what they call bars, that is a prohibition against having a decertification for a certain period of time, none of which is in the National Labor Relations Act. The board has just made up all of these so-called bars. And then there's the blocking charge policy, where if all the union has to do to block a decertification vote is just file a bunch of complaints, true or not, frivolous or not, against the employer. And the board has been turning around and saying, well, there's too many charges of unfair labor practices. We can't have an election now until we've figured all that out.
Wow.
And so it's a regime that has made it really easy for the unions to prevent a decertification from ever happening.
Wow, that's that is something. Now, there have been reports of union bosses receiving hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to bankroll these radical agendas. Can you explain how that process works and why it's so dangerous to both workers and taxpayers?
Yeah, a number of ways that again, under the Biden administration, they were funding big labor's political activities with tax dollars. Of course, first and foremost was the bailing out of the private sector union pensions, which had been mismanaged by their union-dominated boards. We funneled billions of tax dollars into propping up those pensions with no structural reform whatsoever. And then, of course, just the whole regime where workers are forced to pay dues, which ends up funding big labor's political war chest. We see now lots of examples of big labor is now funding some of these renter riots we're finding in various places, particularly around the immigration issue. And then there's the practice of official time, where the federal government is paying government workers to do union work on the government dime. That is hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it was $200 million just at the Veterans Affairs Administration of tax dollars meant to do public service that is instead being used to prop up unions, and that, of course, frees up the union treasury in order to spend it on crap like renter riots.
and I think one of them where they were forcing Jewish students to bankroll these anti-Israel activism, and you talked about the anti-ICE riots, funding that too. I mean, how is that allowable?
Well, it shouldn't be, for sure, but it's the product of 70 years of the unions gradually just encroaching more and more power. I mean, they've always been somewhat independent of the interests of their workers. That's one of the reasons, of course, that we've always pushed the National Right to Work Act. It's not just about freedom of individual workers. With that freedom comes better unions. If the union bosses have to worry what their members actually thought about what they were doing, we'd see far more responsive union leadership.
You know, Greg, Michigan, it made headlines as the first state in decades to repeal its right to work law. What message do you think that sent nationally, and how has it impacted workers here in Michigan? And if it's impacted others throughout the country?
Yeah, impact on workers in Michigan has been awful, of course. They had freedom for 10 years. We passed Michigan's right to work law late in 2012, and so it was about a decade of freedom before the union bosses came back in and started saying, nope, you've got to pay again. And people in Michigan are mad. And that is part of why the Democrats lost the House in the next election. And
Yeah.
I strongly suspect there's going to be a continuing backlash against them in the next gubernatorial race, in the bunch of Senate races coming up in 26. I would not be surprised at all. In fact, I expect that pro-right-to-work forces are going to retake the gubernatorial mansion as well as the state Senate. And if they do, we're going to get that right-to-work law back.
Oh, my goodness, man. He just gave me chills. But, you know, shifting to the states more broadly, now Wisconsin and Virginia are becoming key battlegrounds as the 2025 midterms approach, 2026 midterms approach. What is happening on the ground in those states when it comes to right to work?
Yeah, well, in Wisconsin, the issue really isn't the politicians so much as the amount of money that George Soros and some other billionaires have poured into state Supreme Court races. Those are elected positions in Wisconsin, and they're not necessarily high enough profile that they gather the public interest the way a U.S. Senate race or a governor's race would. And so the amount of money that those guys were able to pour in, they have basically bought the state Supreme Court at this point. And the biggest danger to the state right to work law, as well as Scott Walker's Act 10 reforms, is going to come from that state Supreme Court.
Yeah. What about Virginia?
Yeah, the problem in Virginia, of course, is that Virginia is home to about 70% of the ever-growing federal workforce, and those people tend not to vote for the party of small government. They've got sort of a vested interest. So as a result, Democrats have been gradually growing, especially in the D.C. suburbs part of Virginia, and they have taken power in the state, not completely yet. They took power briefly for a couple of years, about 4 years ago, and they did some damage to labor policy in Virginia. They didn't repeal the state right to work law then. They were kind of afraid to because they knew there would be a pretty bad backlash, like you all saw in Michigan. And nevertheless, the policy environment has gotten worse. Democrats are more and more beholden to big labor, even in a long-time right-to-work state like Virginia. Their current gubernatorial candidate, Abigail Spanberger, when she was in Congress, she co-sponsored a bill that would have wiped out every lost her votes come November in Virginia.
Challenge. It sounds like there's a challenge going forward. But, Greg, you've been at this for more than 20 years. From your vantage point, are we really closer today to a true right-to-work America than we were when you first started?
Oh, absolutely we are. I've been at the Right to Work Committee, almost 28 years now.
Oh, wow.
When I first started, we had a vote in the U.S. Senate. We were able to force a vote on the Right to Work bill. We got, I think it was 37 votes back then in favor of ending a filibuster and advancing the Right to Work law. And that's okay. You know, we needed a benchmark, so we knew who our friends were and who our enemies were. And 15 of the senators that voted against us that year were subsequently defeated in their re-elections, not necessarily in the next election, but in one of their subsequent attempts. And we are now at a point where if push came to shove and we fought it really hard, I think we're pretty close to 50 votes in favor of right to work, maybe even as many as 51. So we've definitely gained ground. And our long-term vision has always been 30 to 35 right-to-work states. That means we'd have 60 to 70 U.S. senators coming from right-to-work states where right-to-work is part of the political fabric and forced dues is not part of the corruption of their politics. Then we could start dreaming about breaking a filibuster on issues like right-to-work and others.
Now, Greg, you talked about earlier about Michigan elections that's coming up for governor and taking back the state, maintaining the House. But what role do you see for ordinary workers who may be listening to this show and voters in this fight? People who may not think about labor policy every day like you do. but are impacted by it deeply.
Yeah, well, they should be out there pushing their candidates every time they see them. Demand to know their positions on right to work. A lot of politicians are going to want to hide them. So we're out there, of course, putting surveys in front of them, asking them to sign it and commit to sign and enact a new right to work law as soon as they take office. And we're going to make sure that everybody in Michigan knows who has promised to do that and who is refusing to promise to do that. And so if they won't answer the survey, that tells us a lot, but they ought to be hearing from their constituents or their potential constituents if they're failing to answer, refusing to answer, and trying to hide their position.
Now, if Trump succeeds, he gets his two people that he has for the National Labor Relations Board. If he succeeds in resetting the rules on labor, this is actually a two-part question. What does America look like in 5 years? Do we see a flourishing of individual freedom, or will the unions find new ways to entrench themselves?
Well, that's an interesting question. I believe that if we get these two new nominees confirmed and a third one as soon as he can get that nominated, I think we're going to start seeing labor policy improving for sure. The board is going to begin reversing a lot of the coercive stuff that the Biden board had done. That is going to increase freedom and work. And Michigan is going to repass its right to work law, and we are going to start seeing a flourishing of people who can choose whether or not they think that union has earned their support. And that is going to produce better, more responsive unions. I think we're on an upward trajectory at this point.
Well, Greg, I just want you to know that you just got an invite to come speak at Oakland County Republicans by Vance Patrick to speak on right to work. So I'll connect you to. He says he wants you there ASAP to speak about these issues. So I'll connect you to. But Greg Mourad, he's worked for the National Right to Work Committee for more than 28 years, and he now serves as its vice president for legislation. Thank you so much for joining us on Detroit's Morning Answer today.
Yeah, happy to be with you, John. Thanks for having me.
All right, you're the guy. You're the man. You're listening to Detroit's Morning Answer. We'll be right back.